Hello everyone, welcome back to SBS Share Business Stories. Today I'm going to be having a wonderful conversation with CEO and COO of EHSL. I would like to welcome Ali and Adam. Hello Ali, Adam, how are you doing today?
Very well.
Thank you.
Yeah, not too bad.
Pleased to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this podcast. So, Ali, just let's get right back to the beginning. Where did the idea for EHS come from?
So EHSL as a supported housing provider works with care providers that deliver health and social care services to people with learning disabilities, autism, mental health needs and other social care needs. So EHSL was born out of a care provider business that was operating this type of service across most of the UK. And around 15 years ago, there was a need identified for housing and care to be provided by separate entities. So with the support of this care provider, then EHSL was set up as a non-profit to operate housing.
Right.
And that was in 2012. So for the first few years, then we worked very closely with one particular care provider, and then we branched out and worked with others and other local authorities to broaden our services and broaden the areas in which we worked. So as a non-profit, then all of our revenue and income goes into providing the services we operate and reinvesting it in developing the organisation, and that's enabled it to grow from initially running about 60 tenancies to around 700 now.
Wow, amazing. So before even EHSL existed, what problem did you see that needing solving?
So the problem was that people's care was being provided by organisations that were also providing a landlord function for them, which meant that if there was a need for their care package to change, then they would have to move out of that accommodation and into a new property. So the intention was in separating housing and care that people could remain in their accommodation and their care provider could change without it affecting their accommodation. So that was a need that existed, because if you look at the history of how health and social care was provided, then in the 90s a lot of the provision was in residential care homes. And then supported living was developed as an alternative model where people could be supported to develop their independence and live lives which were less institutional ultimately. And what that meant was that people would have a tenancy agreement and they would pay rent and they would collect housing benefit to cover that rent, and they would receive a care package that was funded by the local authority. So the need came about to enable the care to be commissioned separately from the housing arrangements, and that gave people more independence and more freedom to make choices about their life and accommodation arrangements that weren't connected to who happened to be providing their care.
And that's lovely. Yeah. So for you, what does EHSL stand for, and what does that name mean to you today? So
EHSL was originally intended to be called Enhanced Housing Support Limited. But as a non-profit, there's an exemption from using limited in a company name, and the company was registered just as EHSL, and that became its name.
Oh, I see.
This was slightly before my time, because I joined after, I think about 6 months after it was registered as a company, and just as it was starting to.
So who founded basically the company?
So the company was founded by a third party who was involved with the care company. So he was an executive within that care company. He then, as part of the project work he was doing, he developed EHSL. I was brought in as a property manager, and then from that point I then took more and more responsibility, and the founder ultimately took a job elsewhere and left the left the charity in my hands. It was very structured and very organised. But that was me at 26 being given quite a lot of responsibility.
So at that moment, was there a particular moment or experience that made you think something has to change? When he left and then you stayed, what made you stay, and then you say, okay?
I think my experiences in the social care sector I'd been in the sector about 5 years at that point, and I'd been working with local landlords to try and find houses for the care clients that we had, and a lot of that was approaching high street letting agents and renting properties from them so that we could provide that accommodation onto the care clients that we were supporting. And that it was very disjointed, because you've got the individual intentions of those landlords. Some might be happy to do it for a year or two, others have been happy to do it for, well, in some cases, a couple of decades.
Yeah.
So you've got quite a disjointed delivery model where some landlords will do it short term, some will do it long term. You've got to reassess the funding, continually assess the demand. You can't provide the same security of tenure. So what we wanted to deliver was a model where the longevity of that tenancy wasn't going to be connected to a shorter head lease that a private landlord was saying, well, I'll renew it next year if I wish to. What we really wanted to do was get longevity in terms of the accommodation we secured to enable us to provide it to our own tenants for a longer period of time. So I think what I'd seen in the sector was this shift away from care providers owning buildings to working with private landlords. And then on top of that, we were working with some portfolio landlords and people who had maybe a more structured and professional approach to delivering housing, because it was something they did as a landlord as a full-time job, rather than a lot of the landlords that we dealt with initially were people who had maybe bought a second home and they could afford to and just kept one on as a rental. So we found that there was a lot of disjointed approaches, and what we needed was a uniformed approach that was consistent with the regulations that existed for funding, so that we can make sure that the accommodation we were offering was appropriately managed, maintained, and that the people living in it were given the support to sustain their tenancies. So it's all part of this evolution of how health and social care was funded and delivered since the mid-1990s, when a lot of long-stay hospitals were closing and people were moving out into the community. And I think what we've learned in the last 20 years or so is that care in the community as a concept was introduced with good intentions, but the delivery of it has been challenged by everything else going on in the world and the economy, the housing market, the market for procuring social care. Local authorities were shifting from being providers of care to purchasers of care from third-party providers, and the whole ecosystem is constantly shifting. And we found that if we focus solely on housing and not on the delivery of care itself, then we could deliver consistency and we could develop a structured service to make sure that all worked.
So coming to what you mean was delivering at that time, so every business faces challenges, so in its early days specifically. So what were some of the biggest challenges you encountered when you took over everything in your hands and so?
There were so many different things to do ultimately. We had properties that were owned by the care provider that we were working very closely with. We had to make sure they were safe, compliant for gas, electric, water, making sure that they were kept in repair, making sure that people were given tenancies that were appropriate, managing the relationship with the care provider and the appointees. And from the early stages, there were only a handful of staff members.
Yeah, that's what I was coming to.
We had to balance the needs of the organisation in terms of what the tenants needed to have provided as part of that service, with the income to cover that, which was predominantly housing benefit.
And that had to be something like, properly done, so you don't fall off when something is.
That's right, happens. And we did have support from an early stage from the care provider, and that support gave us some cash flow flexibility and the ability to do what we needed to do. And
so did the charity had enough funding in the beginning for you to manage and cope with all the finances and the expenses?
It did, yeah. So it had the support of its care provider partner to make sure that we had the liquidity. But that was critical, because we were relying on housing benefit claims and rent being paid, and these things don't always run smoothly. and there's things that local authorities need to be able to make benefit payments, and we had to facilitate all that.
How difficult it is to manage the expenses, and because you have to create a report and you think, okay, we are responsible for everything, has to be like proper paperwork and everything, you know, if anything happens, does that ever scare you? Like, okay, what?
Yeah, well, it does. I mean, there's always a risk in any business that if you're setting up contracts, those contracts are going to have areas that benefit you, and they're also going to have obligations and risks.
Yeah.
So balancing those out was very important. But I think the key was that as a non-profit, then the money coming in was always to be used for the running of the business. There was nobody sat behind it saying, and I want 20% of that as profit. And that, I think, is critical for the whole delivery of supported housing as a service. It is being delivered by non-profit bodies because that's what the regulations require, because they need that protection. So we've always had things like...
Rough legalities you have to make sure. So Adam, when did you become part of the journey?
So I joined in 2016. I've just had my 10 years last weekend, which the company kindly celebrated for me. It was very different back then to how it is now. We sat around a table, not that much bigger than this. You know, it's 3 or 4 of us, and it was very much run like a very small business in that we all chipped in, we all had to help out, we all had to kind of cover each other and take part in lots of different things.
It's so lovely to be part of something which is just, you know,
Oh, yeah.
starting out and thriving, and you just see it from
Yeah.
a baby to
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's back then we used to go and we'd go and look around the houses and meet the tenants, and we'd know them all by name.
Yeah.
And then obviously over the years, as the charity's got bigger and we've taken on more staff. Back then there was only 3 or 4 of us, and now we're approaching probably about 76, 77 people. And you know, whereas our roles have sort of, you know, got more senior, got more defined in kind of leadership areas. So
is it much easier now then?
No, there's a lot of challenges.
So what attracted you to EHSL?
I guess back then I was at a point in my life where I had been to lots of different other housing associations, local authorities. I spent 8 years at a local authority, and everyone done housing management and property services very different.
Yeah.
And when I come into, I come in as a housing officer at EHSL, and again, very different, not used to supported living.
Housing officers sounds like, you know, it's a bit scary. It's coming for inspection.
Yeah, and you have to have the challenging conversations, and you have to do the tenancy sustainment side. And it's a really important role that we have within the business.
Yeah. So what was the organisation? I mean, you just mentioned that it was really small, and then it just grew with time, and it's more like, you know, smooth in a way, like you know what your role is at the moment now, because there at that time you were doing a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has multiple tasks too. So how do you feel now? Is it a bit lighter inside, or like, no?
Well, there's a lot more structure.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot more policies and procedures, and we've got some great departments which are you know, with great staff in them that all know what they're doing, and I think that's really helped us as we've grown, because we've really focused on making sure that each team knows what they're doing, each role knows what the part that they're playing and the importance of that role. And I think that's helped us as we've grown and we've changed and we've adapted and we've taken on new departments. And I think just making sure, because when with growth becomes uncertainty, and some people love it and some people don't. So it's making sure everyone feels safe and secure. Yeah, absolutely. So it's making sure everyone knows their place and what we're aiming to achieve. And I guess for us, we went from doing absolutely everything to several points going, okay, right, now my role needs to change, because actually I'm not doing those frontline operations. I'm overseeing it, and you know, and as it's gone on, it's changed, and you get new people in, and you have to focus on the outcomes rather than the delivery, because we started off as free, and now there's 77 odd people, and everyone does things differently.
Amazing. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think the real important, there's lots of different characters, and it is absolutely important that we focus on the outcomes, and I think that is by having good structure in place, good policies, good procedures, and I think from my point of view, that's really helped us, and kind of as we go on in the the coming years, it's about growing that.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible to hear how one idea grown into an organization supporting hundreds of people. Let's talk about the impact EHSL is making today. So Adam, I have a question for you. So for someone hearing about EHSL for the first time, how would you describe what you do? In summarize it in a few words.
Yeah, so we're providing accommodation to people with an identified support need, whether that be mental health, physical disabilities, learning disabilities, mental health, drug and alcohol, and we are there to give our tenants a foundation for which they can have independence, or more independence. They can receive the care and support that they need by our care partners, and we can provide that intensive housing management that makes their tenancy successful and gives it some longevity. For me, it's really important that we provide a good service. Our properties are clean, and our gardens are tidy, and they're all well maintained, they're safe and secure.
So are they just like the council houses or the private?
Lots of different ones. So we've got a mix of single occupancy properties to shared houses to big blocks of flats. So our biggest one is 29 units, 5 floors. And
I think one of them I'm going to be seeing soon.
Oh, really?
For the workshop as well.
Okay.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So let's see how it goes, and it'd be really nice to experience it in person as well.
Great.
Yeah. So, what does the journey look like from the moment someone is referred to EHSL?
Yeah. So it usually comes through a referral from one of our care partners, and that's normally gone. The care plan's already been agreed with the local authority, and our landlord services team will come in and they'll do the sign up with them. They're talking through the tenancy, they're talking about the expectations in the property. If they're living with others, they'll have a conversation about those. It's all about making someone feel really comfortable in the initial period, because one thing we did identify early on is that a lot of the tenancies failed within the first 6 months. They'd broken down, and so we've put a lot of work into making sure that that kind of intensive housing management is delivered really thoroughly, and
how would you describe the success look like for the people you support when they, the end of tenancy, when they leave the property?
Say that again, sorry.
So what does the success look like for the people who you support, like when the tenancy, it's end of tenancy and they're leaving? So
some of our tenants will go on to more independent living. They might even move into general needs accommodation. Some of our tenants we've had for 10 or 12 years now, I think. So they're here for the long run, and we're really happy about that, because we provide these long and successful houses for them. They're very happy. Other tenants will want to move on. They might form relationships, and they might move in with them into alternative accommodation. So
so there is no permanent residency there. They just, after how long they can stay in, the maximum time they can stay in the property?
there's no time scale on it.
Okay.
So we don't, you get some housing association might have a 2-year limit on it or something like that. We don't have any of that. So for as long as we are in charge of the property, they will be there.
Yeah.
I think the point is, if somebody has complex needs and we're providing accommodation in which those needs can be met, that meets a long-term need, and therefore the accommodation needs to be long-term as well.
Yeah.
Right. So is it around like 5 months, 6 months, or?
I think if somebody leaves after 5 months, it's usually because the placement wasn't ultimately suitable for them. So I know some providers, as Adam said, would have a time limit where somebody may, say, come out of a hospital, they need to settle into community living with a higher level of support and then move on to more independent living after that. But most of the people that we accommodate have a long-term need, and if that need is successfully met by EHSL and by the care provider partners, then that person doesn't move on, because that move on to EHSL's accommodation is the destination. There's no destination necessarily beyond that. Although if people do want to move from a shared environment to a self-contained environment or vice versa, then that's a pathway that we can support them to take.
Can you share a story that really captures the impact EHSL has had on someone's life? I mean, of course, without sharing any confidential details, but
I think we have some people who are tenants of EHSL now. They used to be in long stay hospitals for reasons of mental health. In some cases, they may have been admitted in the 80s when policy was very, very different. They were then discharged into supported living. Some of them went into shared environments, and now they're in self-contained flats with floating support. So when I say floating support, I mean you've got a staff member in the building 24/7, but they're in the building to provide support to a wider group of people, and they're there if that person needs them. So in some of these cases, then people have come out of institutional environments and they've moved on to very independent lives. And that is a success. That's what we want to see. Because you look at the benefit to the person, they're not on a hospital ward, they're not being just given their food each day, they're getting choice about what they eat, how they spend their time, what activities they like to undertake, employment and education. So they're getting support to develop independent lives. And that's beneficial for that person, but it's also beneficial for society as a whole, because hospital wards are costly to run. If people don't need to be there and they can be supported to live in more independent accommodation, then that's what we as a sector need to try to deliver. And it doesn't come without challenge. There's funding challenges, there's operational viability challenges around the delivery of that housing. But for me, a successful outcome is giving somebody the independence in their life that they need, and letting them have as much choice as possible in all areas of their life so that they can develop independence. And that really is what supported living as a whole is about. It's about taking people away from institutional settings where they don't have choice and giving them as much choice as possible while still making sure they're supported and are safe.
And that's amazing, I think, for anyone who has suffered for years and finally, realizing, I can make my choices, and that's amazing job EHSL absolutely doing. So Ali, my question would be now is about EHSL recently became the registered charity. So what led to that decision? So
a lot of people didn't fully understand what it meant to be a company limited by guarantee. Because in this country then we might hear about non-profits, but non-profit is really just a descriptor. The legal status is a company limited by guarantee or a registered charity. And what we felt as we developed as an organisation was that being a company limited by guarantee always was followed by, well, what's that mean then? What are you? Are you a housing association? Are you a charity? And what we thought is actually charitable status is, we've been operating as a charity in terms of reinvesting all revenue and any surplus funds back into the delivery of the services. And we felt that with regulatory changes coming in supported housing, so there's a Regulatory Oversight Act that's been implemented, we felt that being a charity would position us much more clearly than being a company limited by guarantee. So whilst our legal status as a company remains as one limited by guarantee, we're also a registered charity now.
So becoming a charity did, like the way you operate, or opened up new opportunities, do you think?
I wouldn't say it's opened up new opportunities as such as a result of being a charity, but I do think people now have greater clarity around what we are as an organisation. And I think that gives people confidence. Because part of that charity application is about demonstrating that what we do has a public benefit. And we've just talked about the benefit that the people that we
Yeah.
provide accommodation to have by being in this type of accommodation. That's not to say there aren't other organisations out there that do exactly the same thing and do it very, very well, but that's what we do. So to become a charity, we had to demonstrate that there was a public benefit to the work that we do. And I think that registration does validate that this is ultimately a charitable activity.
Yeah. So as EHSL continues to grow, what challenges are you facing now that you perhaps didn't face in the early years and you weren't expecting?
I don't think any of the early challenges have gone away fully.
Yeah.
So the provision of housing, support housing, is always low margin because you've got the costs of the accommodation, you've got the costs of the staff and the overheads, the repairs, the communal services, all of the different things that we do need to be paid for via the rent. And as a result, then a lot of the money that we have come in is already allocated to certain cost areas. So the challenges we get come from delays in receiving that funding. So the way that we operate is we discuss rent levels with housing benefit departments across around 50 or 60 local authorities we work with. We agree those rent levels in terms of whether they're eligible to be paid for via housing benefit, and then individual tenants will make a claim for that benefit, and that's means tested. So if they have capital or other income, say from a pension, they may not receive the full amount of benefit that a tenant without that capital or other income would receive. So there can be delays in receiving rent from our tenants because we know that they're generally going to be reliant on the welfare benefit system to meet that cost. But I view it as a really important part of our role to advocate for our tenants to ensure that they do access the funding that is needed to meet the costs of their accommodation. So when discussing it with local authorities, we're talking about the scope of the service, we're talking about the cost of providing it, whether that's reasonable, whether the accommodation they're being provided with is of an appropriate size for them. So for instance, somebody who has an overnight carer in a 3-bedroom property, well, actually you've got a third room there that isn't necessarily needed. So there's discussions with local authorities about suitability and why that other room might be needed. So these discussions can be quite long and complex because there's a lot of case law that relates to supported housing and housing benefit funding that we have to fully understand to make sure that when we're advocating for our tenants around the rent levels, we properly understand the legal context and framework around how that funding is then made available.
So talking about the time it takes, do you think sometimes when somebody needs help or support with the housing and it's taking too long, how do you manage those challenges? How do you talk to these people? There's still some time, we need some time, and how do they react, their reaction?
I think from an early stage then our approach was to say to people involved in the care sector, we will try and support the accommodation arrangements that you need, and we'll try and procure the accommodation and make it available to you as a bespoke type service. And the problem with that is it's very granular, it's very time consuming. In some cases, the accommodation that person wants isn't available, it isn't affordable. So somebody
and how they take that?
Well, I think the difficulty is that as a sector, we have to make sure that the broad needs of the cohorts that we provide accommodation to can be met via all manner of different providers and networks. So we're not just operating this type of housing in isolation of any wider sector, but you've got care providers, you've got housing associations, you've got other charities, you've got private landlords, you've got people who may have the means to buy their own property or need support to. So there's lots of different approaches to providing accommodation. But in some cases we have people, if they've tried many of them and there simply is no accommodation available to them that meets their needs. And that, as a sector, is something we have to address. And I think one of the things that's going to improve that is under the new Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act, local authorities are going to be required to publish a 5-year strategy which identifies the demand in that area. So local authorities are having to think about this in perhaps a more detailed way than they were previously required to. But the publication of these strategies will enable organisations like EHSL to gain an understanding of what there might be an over provision of, what there might be an under provision of, and where that need is greatest. And it may be that these local authorities are very specific and they say we need 6 wheelchair accessible flats in this postcode. In others, it may be more generic and say we're going to need housing for 150 people in the next 5 years.
But do you think the demand is more than the properties that you...
Yeah, the demand is growing all the time. And I think we're seeing, there's even hospitals, long stay hospitals that are open today and they're closing, and long stay residential care homes that are not the type of service that would be designed and commissioned now, and the people living in them are getting older, they might be moving on to elderly care or passing away. And it's about reconfiguring what exists within the sector to make sure it remains relevant to meeting the needs of the people who have that accommodation need now.
I think one of the points as well is where our care partners and has agreed for a tenant to that they can provide the care, and that we've confirmed that we can provide the accommodation. We have always been very proactive in making sure that that tenant can get into that accommodation, and we can get them signed up, and we can get their housing benefit processed. I think the delays in housing benefit sometimes can be a very long time, and then you've got a tenant in there that we are providing services to, we're providing intensive housing management to, we're providing repairs to, and sometimes housing benefit could be 12 weeks before you see any payment for the rent. So it can affect cash flow as well. If you're taking on a new scheme and you've got a 6-bed scheme and you've got multiple people moving in, we're providing those services, and we're not getting paid for it for some substantial time. It does have a knock on for the cash flow as well. But we've always taken the approach that we will work with housing benefit. Our staff will work with housing benefit. We'll find the solutions. We'll give them the information that they want, and we'll provide the services in that time as well.
We don't ever stop providing the services simply because the rent hasn't been paid, because we know that the people we house are not in control. It's not like providing housing to working people who have a salary coming in each month, and if the rent isn't paid, it's because it's just not been done. These are cases where people are reliant on a benefit system to meet their accommodation costs, but the burden is placed on us as a provider to facilitate that. And if we get to 8 weeks and somebody hasn't paid any rent yet because their benefit claim hasn't been processed, we wouldn't, like a private landlord might do, serve them with notice to leave, because we know the reasons and we know that we're partially in control of those as well.
Yeah, that would be so under pressure kind of situation.
And it's difficult because obviously from our point of view, there's an expense, we're bringing on a new scheme as well, and for that not being paid for that amount of time, it has a knock on for the cash flow. So it's something that we've had to consider over the years when bringing on new schemes.
Yeah, so I just want to switch this conversation towards for new entrepreneurs, let's say, when they're starting. So do you remember your very first client or organization that placed their trust in you? I mean, it was just starting at that point.
Yeah, aside from the company that was involved in setting up EHSL, then we knew some other care companies where staff members or people that we'd worked with previously had gone to work with them, and they reached out to us and said, can you help us? And there was a lot of trust placed in us, but also a lot of trust of EHSL placed in these other parties, because what these schemes are is ultimately a venture that is taken together. They know that if they enter into an arrangement where we provide accommodation but they don't have clients yet, they know that they have to cover some of the costs of holding that accommodation whilst we wait for the clients. And therefore there's a financial pressure on the care providers, and they know then that they have to be positioned to secure those placements from the local authority to make sure that the care service that they operate is viable. So from an early stage where we were partnering with some of these third-party care providers, as we'd call them back then, we knew that we had to demonstrate our worth to them, and we had to demonstrate why it was appropriate to work with us rather than them just doing it alone. And I think, as Adam was saying, we were doing everything back then. We were taking calls about, toilet seats that had come loose, and the heating has gone on a Sunday night. What do we do? We were dealing with those calls, and that is one of those challenges, and we had to make sure that we were responsive and reactive, because we didn't necessarily have the structures within the charity that we do now. So whilst we did have an out of hours contractor, they'd constantly ring me, God, I've had a call from this site and they say the heating isn't working, and what do you want us to send someone out or not, and what do you want us to do? So we had to, as Adam mentioned earlier, we've had to move back from doing the frontline work to making sure that we've got structures and systems in place that still enable that work to be carried out properly, and that does mean allowing other people to take the reins on certain aspects of delivery. And I think the key is the question was really about advice to other people who might be wanting to do this sort of thing. You've got to be prepared to get your hands dirty at an early stage and do everything, but from that you learn about the intricacies of how each aspect of what you're doing is delivered, and then when you do step back from doing that yourself, you do know it in depth and intimately, so that you can guide the people that you're bringing in.
Yeah. So one last question: if you had to start again tomorrow, with no contacts, no reputation, and no business, where would you begin?
I would initially, I'd contact local care provider companies that were providing supported living services, ask them about the challenges that they were facing, whether it's funding, access to accommodation, structuring the arrangements, delivering the accommodation, and provide services or offer the provision of services and structures that would take those problems away from them.
And what's one mistake you would avoid making a second time that you think, okay?
I think with hindsight, then I think we should probably have registered as a charity straight off the bat.
Yeah.
But I think that decision was not made at the time. We worked within the structures that existed, and we took that decision later. But I do think with hindsight.
I think that's because we were so busy doing the day-to-day, though, so focused on building the service and the company, that there was so much to do. You kind of couldn't look that far ahead until we started to get a little bit bigger and we had a few more staff that could actually then give us the time to go, actually, what's next for EHSL? And it's taken some time, but I do feel that now we're in a place where we can look ahead 5 years. We can start to plan and go, actually, what is the direction that the charity wants to go in, needs to go in, because of the regulatory changes that are occurring. And I think a lot of people feel the same when they're doing a small business, is that you're so hands-on, you kind of don't see you don't see anything else apart from the delivery. So it can be challenging.
Thank you so much, Ali and Adam, for joining me for today's podcast. It was lovely talking to you, all your experience and how EHSL just grew. It was amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching us today. And if you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe, leave a review to us, and then let me know what should I cover in the next episode. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.